I mean, I don't know if you really think that when you die you can be corporeally reassembled and have conversations with authors from previous epochs. It's not necessary that you believe that in Christian theology, and I have to say it sounds like a complete fairy tale to me. The only reason I want to meet Shakespeare, or might even want to, is because I can meet him any time, because he is immortal in the works he's left behind. If you've read those, meeting the author would almost certainly be a disappointment. But when Socrates was sentenced to death for his philosophical investigations and for blasphemy, for challenging the gods of the city, and he accepted his death, he did say, well, if we are lucky, perhaps I'll be able to hold conversation with other great thinkers and philosophers and doubters too. In other words, that the discussion about what is good, what is beautiful, what is noble, what is pure and what is true could always go on. Why is that important? Why would I like to do that? Because that's the only conversation worth having. And whether it goes on or not after I die, I don't know. But I do know that it's the conversation I want to have while I'm still alive. Which means that to me, the offer of certainty, the offer of complete security, the offer of an impermeable faith that can't give way, is an offer of something not worth having. I want to live my life taking the risk all the time that I don't know anything like enough yet, that I haven't understood enough, that I can't know enough, that I'm always hungrily operating on the margins of a potentially great harvest of future knowledge and wisdom. I wouldn't have it any other way. And I'd urge you to look at those of you who tell you, those people who tell you at your age that you're dead till you believe as they do. What a terrible thing to be telling to children. And that you can only live. And that you can only live by accepting an absolute authority. Don't think of that as a gift. Think of it as a poisoned chalice. Push it aside, however tempting it is. Take the risk of thinking for yourself. Much more happiness, truth, beauty, and wisdom will come to you that way. Thank
you. We have to begin by repudiating all such claims. Grand rabbis, chief ayatollahs, infallible popes, the peddlers of surrogate and mutant quasi-political religion and worship. The dear leader, the great leader, we have no need of any of this. And looking at them and their record and the pathos of their supporters, I realize that it is they who are the grand impostors. And my own imposture this evening was mild by comparison. Thank you very much.
I used to find in arguments about Iraq that I knew right away when someone didn't know what they were talking about. And the dead giveaway would always be when they would say, all right, I agree, Saddam Hussein is a bad guy. I said, that means you don't know anything about him.
Saddam Hussein was a bad guy, right? He was a bad guy, really bad guy. But you know what he did well? He killed terrorists. He did that so good. They didn't read him the rights. They didn't talk. They were a terrorist. It was over.
If you point out to them that they've been fooled, they just gave their savings to someone who's a swamp real estate artist, they do not thank you for pointing it out. They're much more likely to blame you than the person who's just defrauded or deceived them. Why? Because they don't like to be told that they're gullible. People like to think that they're smart and wised up.
It always makes me suspicious when, you have these apolitical businessmen saying, well, I just want to, put the country back on its feet and restore incentives and so forth. There's something, frankly, I think, sinister about it, unless the guy's prepared to say a great deal more about what his political opinions are. For example, has he ever voted before and for whom? I'd like to know, because it's much too easy to talk, if the country can be run like USA Inc., with a real can-do guy, there's a whiff of fascism to that, I think.
Let me ask you,
I don't care who is the occupant of the White House in 2008 as long as they have made a promise to draw the line and say that bin Ladenism or its surrogates will never take power in Iraq or retake it in Afghanistan. I'm presuming that issue will not have been decided by 2008. I expect this war to be going on for the rest of my life, and probably well into the life of my son. my oldest son. That will again be the only thing I care about. It is possible that there could be a Democrat who would say that. And it's even possible that it would be my least favorite Democrat, Mrs. Clinton. It's possible. And that she could be held to it. In that case, I'd happily give her my vote. That's what the Secretary of State is for. And what you want as President is to know your Secretary of State spends all her time working to make sure that your policies stick. With this woman, that can't be said. She's always thinking first about herself, second about her husband.
What about her
I
husband?
trust Barack Obama
He's playing a role
more than yours.
Christopher, last question here.
That's never changed. That's never changed, and it's never going to. So he won't have.
That's your opinion, Christopher.
Nor will anyone. Well, guess what? Guess who's saying it? That's a very clever thing to say. Shall I ask? Would you prefer I uttered your opinion? What a fatuous remark.
Christopher, let me ask you, Christopher. Let's raise this for a last
opinion. Barack Obama is the supremely qualified person. Your opinion matters.
Christopher and Joan, I want to ask one objective question, which does not have any values attached to it. Will Bill Clinton, with his popularity in South Asia, be brought in as an envoy with regard to Kashmir and the general dispute between Pakistan and India? Christopher, will he be used in that regard, the former president?
Someone whose main clientele is the Wahhabi royal family of Saudi Arabia, who've paid for the people who just blew up Bombay, I don't think would be an ideal mediator, no, but that's just my opinion, as Miss Walsh would say.
Joan?
Christopher, you can call me Joan. I've had dinner at your house. That seems condescending to call me Miss Walsh. You know, Chris,
if I said Joan, you'd have said I was being condescending.
Oh, come on.
Hardly, not at all. We've had drinks together.
Christopher Hitchens' death from cancer at the age of 62 has ended his reign as perhaps the most articulate and contrarian intellectual of his generation. As vibrant on the page as he was at the bar. That's how Vanity Fair magazine put it. Hitch, as he was called by his friends on either side of the Atlantic, was both unpredictable and unafraid of offending anyone. And offend he did. Passionate and opinionated, he once even set about telling Americans how to make a proper cup of tea. Jonathan Rugman looks back at his life.
Well, there can be no other explanation for people wanting to vote for Governor George Bush of Texas except that he puts an end to the Clinton-Gore era.
He thrived on verbal combat. He was a doyen of the left and then the right, though taking a stand against abusers of power was his one constant.
I suppose we have to congratulate you on being absolutely 100% consistent in your support for unmentionable thugs and criminals.
Christopher Hitchens argued about everything, and everything he did was to excess.
Christopher lived, as he wrote, to maximum effect. He always had more, I think, of everything. He had more conversation. He had the most extraordinary full prose style. He could consume more cigarettes and wine and whiskey than anybody else. He could remember more lines of English poetry than anyone I've ever known.
But it was the printed word which made his name. There were 17 books in all, and he loved making enemies in them. He wanted US Secretary of State Henry Kissinger to be tried for America's bombing of Cambodia.
I did not have sexual relations with that woman.
His book on the Clinton years was called No One Left to Lie To. He called Mother Teresa a lying, thieving Albanian dwarf, but that was just a dress rehearsal for his attack towards the end of his life on God himself.
Once you assume a creator and a plan, it makes us objects in a cruel experiment whereby we are created sick and commanded to be well. I'll repeat that. Created sick and then ordered to be well. And over us to supervise this is installed a celestial dictatorship, a kind of divine North Korea.
He was born in Portsmouth, the son of a distant and stiff-lipped naval officer. At Oxford, he hated losing on University Challenge. He once described George Bush as abnormally unintelligent, but he'd witnessed the suffering of Iraq's Kurds, which made the Bush-Blair plot to topple Saddam Hussein seem irresistible.
Either you are with us or you are with the terrorists.
Whether you liked what he said or you didn't like what he said or agreed or disagreed with him, he had this incredible strength and formidable courage in standing up for what he believed.
Because of Iraq, many on the left never forgave him.
This is a bloated, drink-sodden former Trotskyist, lunatic.
Mr. Galloway, you've insulted me now 3 times.
George Galloway despised him, but the feeling was mutual.
The man's search for a tyrannical fatherland never ends. The Soviet Union's let him down. Albania's gone. The Red Army's out of Afghanistan and Czechoslovakia. The hunt persists.
His last outrageous act was dying of esophageal cancer, aged just 62. But nobody could say of Hitch that he hadn't lived life to the full.
We don't have that moment in Germany. We don't have that moment in Russia. We don't know we know what happened after the Kirov assassination in Leningrad, and the opportunity it gave to Stalin to seize supreme power. We know roughly what happened in the night of the long knives, when Adolf Hitler realized that he could massacre every rival of his, not just in German politics, but within his own party, which is always the crucial thing. But with Iraq, we do have the actual moment, and you see it. There's the Central Committee of the Ba'ath Party, perhaps 100 people, are sitting in a very formal array in a conference room. And Saddam Hussein is chairing them from a podium, smoking a large cigar. And suddenly, without warning to anyone, in is dragged between two guards and in chains a broken man, a man who is obviously physically and mentally been utterly destroyed. His personality has been evacuated. And prodded a bit, he stumbles through a confession that implicates himself and others in a plot to destroy the Iraqi Republic, to remove the regime of the Ba'ath Party, and to ruin the Iraqi revolution, the counter-revolution. He says the regime behind it is the Syrian regime. It could have been anybody. It could have been international Zionism. It could have been anything you like, but he actually implicates, in this case, the Syrian Ba'ath Party rivals. Having confessed for himself and having begged to be executed for his crimes, having been reduced to a state of complete abjection, the man then says, the following members of this Central Committee were with me in this plot, and he begins to read out their names. Slowly. And as this happens, you can see it, the guards move every time a name is mentioned, and they grab the member of the Central Committee and lead him out of the door. And after about a dozen of these, there's panic. Sheer animal panic starts to spread among those who haven't yet been named. And in the hope that they're not going to be, they start screaming and jumping up and saying, "Glory to Saddam Hussein, our leader, all praise to him, the sun, the moon, the stars of Iraq," praying that it won't be them who are called next. Nothing makes any difference. The harvest just goes out randomly. They're taken off the chessboard and taken out until half of them are gone, and the rest are just limp and done for and almost dying with relief that it wasn't them. It's the most extraordinary live show of a real, for keeps, political purge that you'll ever see. And then there's the second half, which has been seen by much fewer people and was not shown on PBS, where the surviving half are told to go out in the yard and are given guns and are told to shoot the convicted half. Now they're in the plot. Now they are cemented to the leadership. Now, Kanan Makir in his book says correctly, he says, Hitler wouldn't have thought of that. Stalin didn't even think of that, and he thought about these things a lot, about how to get one member of the Central Committee to betray another member and keep them all guessing so that you're the ultimate beneficiary. But this is that added little touch of sadomasochistic genius. This is the adding of The Godfather and The Soprano to the mixture of Nazism and Stalinism that was, in fact, the birth of Ba'athist ideology to begin with, in case you don't know or haven't studied it. The Iraqi Ba'ath Socialist Party was modelled in large part on admiration for European National Socialist and fascist movements.
Bad food and groveling, a lousy combination. Well, but I'm going to give out some leaflets.
Oh, please do. Please do. This is my one and only success other than the right-winged...
oh, someone's shouting my name through a loud hill.
Oh. They love you. They're shouting White House pimp whore. What? Pimp whore.
Stop the madness! Stop the madness!
Hitchens asked us to believe that hundreds of thousands of Western soldiers invading a Muslim country would make less Islamist fundamentalism.
Hitchens attracts such vitriol from his own camp because, like some other dissident leftists, he's highly critical of identity politics. It's since the 60s that questions of race and gender have become as important to the left as that old bogey class.
Christopher Hitchens is just a voice in the wilderness that really resonates for me, so it was really great to hear.
You got to go back to the pre-60s left to read voices like that. Even in fiction, you have to check out John Dos Passos, you know, and yeah,
that's how far back you have to
go. And he's that's what makes him so refreshing.
Joining us now is Christopher Hitchens, author of the book Why Orwell Matters. He's on the phone with us from his home here in Washington. Nice to have you back on the program today.
Very good of you to invite me.
And what did you learn from 1984?
Well, I was thinking as you were talking of what people have been taught about it, and I know that for a great number of American and I think also Western European students, it was taught as a kind of Cold War parable, not completely inaccurately, because it's clearly a communist rather than a fascist form of totalitarianism. There's a blend of both that's being attacked. After all, fascism was dead by the time Orwell started to write the book.
Mm-hmm.
So it was much more challenging to write about the communist version of the totalitarian idea.
Fascism was dead and discredited.
And indeed discredited. So that would have been, as they say, flogging a dead horse. But he did issue a very strong statement when the book came out, saying, please don't misinterpret this. It's not an attack on socialism. It's not an attack on the left as such. And he said, I've set the action of it in England to show that the British people are no better than anyone else, no worse, but no better, that it could happen here too, that it's a permanent danger and temptation. And I think that's one of the reasons why the book has survived, because he made sure that it could be independent of time and place.
So it's not just about the 20th century totalitarianism.
No, Orwell had three targets in his life, as I say in my book, of tyranny. One was the first one that he drew his sights on. The first one he experienced was actually British imperialism in Burma and elsewhere in Asia. Then, of course, when fascism attacked Europe, he took up arms himself and went to Spain to oppose it. It's interesting, by the way, he hardly writes anything against fascism in that period. He assumes that everyone knows that there's something pornographic and ghastly and evil about it. You don't really need to explain why you're against it. And then, having run into the communists in Spain, who pretend to be on his side but aren't really, he spends the rest of his life warning the intellectuals that if they believe in Joseph Stalin and in the Russian model, they're being terribly deceived, or they're deceiving others.
Nevertheless, he considered himself a socialist.
Very much so. He was he joined in the Spanish Civil War a militia that was politically, you could say, to the left of the Communist Party. There was a left opposition, almost Trotskyist formation, and he was a member in Britain of the Independent Labour Party, which was well to the left of the main stream. So no, he died a socialist, all right, but he was absolutely convinced that, therefore, if only for that reason, that it was socialist illusions that he should be exposing.
We interrupt regular programming to bring you a message from Her Majesty's government. Please stand by and await further information. This is an emergency warning from the BBC. Information of a possible nuclear strike against this country has been received. The current threat level is critical, meaning an attack is imminent. Civilians are advised to stay in their homes. Evacuations are currently taking place in the London, Manchester, Birmingham and Leeds areas. If you are in these areas, police will lead you to safety. Follow their orders without question. If you are not in these areas,
I think the gentleman is completely right. We are long overdue a national debate about
the last one, Boris? It was in 1975.
And it was in 1975, which is too long ago.
Christopher Hitchens.
And it's about time we had another.
The Conservatives were in for 18 years after that. They never had a single one. Not one.
That's no argument for not having one now.
Christopher Hitchens.
Christopher.
The reason why the judges have been so consistent on this is not because, I can't believe the show I've just been listening to, not because as you've allowed people to say that they're Nazis or Stalinists or sadists.
Did I say that?
Yeah, well, no, the people who you've been the megaphone for all evening and been encouraging, I might add, the silly girl who says, why should it only be men who decide? The people who... Randall Terry, Catholic... Randall Terry... Wait, are you asking me or telling me?
I'm asking you a question.
Well, why don't you listen to what I've got to say then?
You're saying that they're ridiculous
Listen,
people.
I've had to be sitting in this chair
situation.
for half an hour listening to you being a megaphone for frauds, and I'm giving you my response. You've had people, and you've been encouraging them and flattering them for saying that it's all men, that it's unfair to women, that the judges are fascists and Stalinists and sadists and so on. It's not because of any of this. It's because they can't find that there's a life involved. The woman is dead. It's a four-letter word, D-E-A-D. There's another four-letter word. All her biological and medical lines are flat, F-L-A-T. She is the ex-W-F-I-E of the wretched, luckless Michael Shiver, who's had to put up with a great deal of innuendo and abuse also from your guests. It's all over. There isn't a life to protect. What you're doing here is encouraging extremists and religious fanatics like Randall Terry to try and recover credit for a church that's, for good reason, been losing it lately by appealing to hysteria and demagogy and emotion. You should be ashamed of the show you've been running.
You know what? You should be ashamed of your characterization, and I requested on Monday when we fax it to you that you read the transcript of this entire show.
You faxed me no such thing. You faxed me no such thing.
I said I will fax it to you on Monday, and we will compare notes on Tuesday on this show. Pat Buchanan, what's your... I mean, I could read you 100 quotes of founding fathers talking about the importance of religion.
There is not a word about. There is not a word about Christianity.
You know, I could get you quotes.
George Washington was a deist. Benjamin Franklin.
I think this
whatever
is the
he felt obliged to say in public was a non-believer.
Problem that we have.
And Matt, you know, hold on a second, Matt. You know, let's bring a little light to this instead of all heat. Let's bring a little light to this conversation and talk about trans.
Light only comes from heat.
Okay, thank you so much, Christopher. Hold on, guys, stop. God bless us all. Just stop and let's have a meaningful conversation instead of people talking on top of each other.
Don't invite me on and tell me to keep quiet.
Well, Christopher, you know, why don't you let other people talk for a second, okay?
You invited me.
Okay, so anyway, Matt.
To listen to yours.
Okay, well, you know what, Christopher, I'll never make that mistake again.
Fair
Matt, here's the question, okay? Merry Christmas and good night.
Right now, there is somebody who is in custody and is being interviewed by local police.
Who sets a Christmas tree on fire?
Who sets a Christmas?
That's why we launched our Friend or Foe Christmas campaign, and on our website at lc.org we have a memo that talks about what the law is.
Okay, Christopher, go ahead.
I'm supposed to just sit and listen to a broadcast for Jerry Falwell from Lynchburg. Is that right?
Go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead.
The tree long predates Christmas. There's been a festival of light, in fact, and of trees, Yule logs, trees. That's why they're all from Scandinavia, since the winter solstice was first thought of, long before any mythical event in the Middle East, a birth the date of which even the Bible cannot get right and repeatedly gets wrong. That's fine. Celebrated all they like. It would be impossible to live in this country and not notice that there are lots of Christians who like to celebrate the birthday of the person they believe is their savior. You cannot possibly escape it, but we don't want it to enjoy any public preference or subsidy, and the Constitution says that we don't have to.
The South Carolina primary, they mentioned what percentage of the primary voters on the Democratic side are black, with the assumption then that they're all going to vote for Barack Obama. It sounds like things are changing, though. People are making up their own minds.
I think we should make it a principle that the definition of racism is the belief that the human species is divided by race. If, like me and millions of other people who don't think that, you don't think that we are subdivided as a species by race, the whole picture changes very abruptly. For example, why does someone with a white mother get called black?
Now,
why isn't his claim to be white is surely just as good as mine? And I, by the way, have been to the National Geographic and had, as you can have for $100, my DNA analyzed. I can show you on a map which part of Africa my ancestors come from.
Now,
it actually looks like Angola in my case, but this, really the whole definition of our civil rights revolution ought to have been, and once was, that sort of thing doesn't count for a serious.
Right, before the groundswell of conversation gets too loud, I'm going to ask Christopher Hitchens to summarise what his feelings are at the end of this debate. Christopher.
I think I'll address myself principally to Dr. Spivey, who has ducked the motion not by saying that religion should be transcended, or we would be better off if it were to be, but rather like Dr. Scruton has simply said, well, we can't hope to. We're stuck with it. Well, that's not what the motion says. The motion says, suppose we could, as some of us have, transcended the supernatural and the superstitious, would our example, if followed, not be a superior one? I think we've made a pretty strong case for that. I'll correct him also on another point, a very common misapprehension, and I'll try and demonstrate in doing so that we are not on this side deaf to the numinous, as it were. It is flat out not true to say that Karl Marx referred to religion as an opiate or an opium. What he says, I can quote it from memory, from his contribution to the critique of Hegel's philosophy of right, is this. He says, religion is the sigh of the oppressed creature, the heart of the heartless world, the spirit of the spiritless situation. It is an opiate for the sufferer, for the people. So he goes on to say, the demand to give up its illusion is the demand to give up the condition that requires illusions. And he closes by saying that criticism has plucked the flowers from the chain, not so that men and women may wear the chain without consolation, but so that they may break the chain and cull the living flower. Now, the fact that you've been lied to about what he said all this time by religious spokesmen shouldn't conceal from you the knowledge that we have a very clear understanding of where this impulse comes. I actually don't like the Sistine Chapel. I didn't like it even before I knew that every brick of St. Peter's was raised by the sale of indulgences, which obviously changes nothing for Dr. Scruton either, by a special sale of indulgences, by the way. But I do like the Parthenon very much. I've written a book about it, and I think as an achievement of artistic symmetry and architectural glory, it probably has no Christian rival. But I believe that I can. In fact, I know I can. I'm sure I'm not the only one who has been there and said and appreciated and loved it without having to subscribe to the superstitions of the Eleusinian mysteries, to the cult of Athena and Zeus, to the Melian expedition and the Peloponnesian War, to slavery and Athenian imperialism, and to human sacrifice. We can have our Parthenon, and we can indeed recover it from what was done to it by Byzantine Ottomans, by Venetian Catholics, by National Socialist barbarians and many others. We can still have it. It's our common property without the superstitions that go with it, without the dread and fear and sacrifice, the terrified, cringing humanity that was so much sheltered under the walls as it was being raised. And the word for that, the ability to have these things, to have John Milton's poetry, to have Philip Larkin's poem Church-Going, to have Shakespeare, without the superstition, is called culture, on which we've all laid our lives, on which we've all sworn to defend ourselves and our civilization against, especially now, precisely against religious barbarism, against those who know they are right, against those who say they only need one book, against those who say they know God's on their side, against those who say there's a revelation. That's what culture is. That's what we're defending. Yes, we'd be better off with culture, and yes, we can have it without religion, which is a mind-forged manacle. Thanks.
Thank you.